So coming back down to some India-specific issues, the government is extremely focused on compliance. The budget speech this time around, we had the finance minister giving examples of how small our actual, individual tax-paying base was. And of course, now there is a disincentive for using cash. There are taxes being imposed. What are the lessons that India can learn from the global standpoint when it comes to managing and cracking down on the black economy?
Yeah. Well, this is a huge issue. And a lot of countries in the world have a journey to go on this. It's one I feel very particularly passionate about, because we are not going to solve the world's problems or particular accelerate development by over-reliance on single sources of taxation. So you often see NGOs saying the solution is to tax multinationals more. Well, it can't be, because there's a limit to how much you're going to get from that. It's never going to be enough to pay for the infrastructure that countries need. So we have to go down a route that involves indirect taxes. I think that virtually, in fact, the United States will soon be one of the very few countries in the world that hasn't introduced a VAT, GST type tax. And there are some people who say that sooner or later they'll have to do it there. So that's the route that most people are going. And the other thing is digitisation, because inevitably digitisation is going to help with the issue of the black economy and the lost revenues that need to be dealt with.
So I'm going to come to both of these one by one. Before I do that, the concept of introducing a tax, let's say, on cash transactions or maybe withdrawals, the sort of ideas that the government has been toying with and restricting cash usage above a certain threshold, which is what we got in this budget. Do you think these are concepts that work? Looking at the global experience.
It's quite an innovative approach, frankly. I mean, that hasn't happened very much anywhere else. In fact, I'm struggling to think of another situation where you've actually charged a tax. I mean, the real big question is on this is to what extent do you push and to what extent do you pull? It's probably got to be a bit of both. But, I am very impressed at the fact that India is focusing on having more and more people banked with bank accounts, because at the end of the day, there's no good punishing people for cash if you haven't given them facility to have an alternative. So I think there's got to be as much pull, and the onus is on the banking sector, the telephone companies. I think telephones could play a big part in this. To pull people into the digital economy rather than just push them and punish them if they're not there.
Now talking about, of course, GST, the big reform that we've been trying to push through for the last 1 decade. When we always hear experts, the view is that it's not going to be a perfect GST because we are looking at 4 different tax rates. We're looking at certain surcharges. We're looking at an additional sin tax and, the entire compensation mechanism, because this is a federal structure. In the current form, the way the GST law is being debated and drafted right now, how would you rate it?
Well, it is more complex than the way other people have gone. I mean, again, this is always a big trade-off, isn't it? Because one of the problems that you have with a very straightforward GST or VAT system is that it's not progressive. And if you think about the overall impact of tax, moving away from direct taxes on corporations and on income and into an indirect tax system, the criticism that is often levelled is that it's not progressive. It falls disproportionately on the less well-off. So you've got to try, some people try, therefore, to correct for that by differences in rates and so on. So it's a trade-off. A bit of complexity against tax policy, which at the end of the day I do believe that the rich ought to pay a bigger proportion of their income in tax.
Any other global examples from where perhaps India could learn when it comes to a more complicated implementation of GST with multiple rates instead of one simple common rate?
Yes, well again I'm sort of struggling to think of where we've got multiple rates. We used to have them, we do have various exemptions in the European Union. The country I would look to actually, and it's not so much on the complexity around the rates, it's about the way they've used technology, is Brazil. So Brazil has implemented a system of basically real-time invoice matching, which is, as I understand it, how it's intended to work here. And if I talk to my Brazilian colleagues, that hasn't been a universally easy process to get that adopted, but it does now seem to be bedded in, and it has certainly achieved the objective of massively cutting down the size of the black economy.
Finally, Jane, dealing with the big world of internet and online transactions out there, and of course the concept of this equalization levy that India recently introduced, that if you are a foreign entity and you're providing online services, you don't have a permanent establishment in India, you still have to pay 6% tax. Again, is this a fair sort of a levy, you would say? And any other lessons for India when it comes to dealing with revenue recognition, revenue that's being generated online, because a lot of it is cross-border?
Yes. Well, again, that is a fairly unusual thing, but a lot of people are thinking about it. It is, if you like, the big unanswered question about BEPS. Because if you remember, one of the key BEPS action plans was the digital economy, and we all sat around and debated it for a while, but then the OECD decided to put it in the too difficult box. It hasn't gone away, and it is going to come back again. I know particularly that China is looking at this. There are some French people who have come up with a very innovative approach to digital transactions. It would be nice to think that we could all step back and again try and come up with a universally agreed way of doing this, because I think if everybody tries to get a bit of that digital income without us really thinking through what are the principles that should underlie it, we are going to end up in a slightly chaotic world, I'm afraid.
We live in interesting times.
We certainly do.
Thank you so much for having this interaction with us.
My pleasure.
That's it on this special.